Vampire dreams. The hum of idle chatter filled the classroom, a lazy buzz that matched the humid afternoon air. Amara leaned back in her chair, absent-mindedly twisting one of her long, waist-length dreadlocks around her finger. Her boyfriend, Malik, was busy at his desk near the front, scribbling something for their history project. She glanced at him briefly. He was solid and dependable, her anchor in a sea of chaos. "Quiet down, everyone," Mrs. Garner announced, her sharp voice cutting through the noise. "We have a new student joining us today." Amara barely looked up from her notebook. New students weren't exactly rare at Johnson High. Most came and went without leaving much of an impression, and she had no reason to believe today would be any different. Until she heard him. "Hello, everyone." The deep baritone, smooth as velvet, slid into the room like a warm breeze. Amara's pen stilled in her hand as an unfamiliar sensation prickled down her spine. She looked up and froze. The boy standing at the front of the room seemed like he had stepped out of a painting. His skin was a rich, deep brown that glowed faintly under the flickering classroom lights. Thick, shoulder-length dreadlocks framed a face that was both sharp and regal, with high cheekbones and piercing, golden-brown eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. He was tall, at least 6'5", with a lean, athletic build that made him tower over Mrs. Garner. His uniform, though identical to everyone else's, somehow looked tailored to perfection. "Introduce yourself," Mrs. Garner prompted, looking as flustered as half the girls in the room. "My name is Kael," he said, his full lips curving into a smile that revealed a set of dazzlingly white teeth. "It's nice to meet you all." The room erupted into whispers. Amara could feel the shift in the air, as though his presence alone had tilted the axis of their small, predictable world. The girls in the back giggled loudly, and even some of the guys exchanged impressed glances. Kael's gaze swept across the classroom, landing briefly on Malik, who straightened defensively in his seat, before moving on. When his eyes met Amara's, they lingered. For one long, breathless moment, it was as though the rest of the world melted away. His golden brown eyes locked with hers, and she felt a strange heat bloom in her chest. She wanted to look away, to break whatever spell he had cast, but she couldn't. Her heart pounded erratically, loud enough that she was sure he could hear it. Then Kael's lips quirked, almost imperceptibly, into a knowing smirk. It jolted Amara back to reality. She quickly averted her gaze, her cheeks burning. What was that? She thought, frowning as she tapped her pen nervously against the desk. She had a boyfriend. A loyal, loving boyfriend. She wasn't the type to get flustered over some new guy, no matter how ridiculously attractive he was. Still, something about Kael unnerved her. It wasn't just his looks. It was the way he carried himself, like he owned every room he stepped into. He exuded a quiet confidence that bordered on arrogance, and she immediately decided she didn't like him. He was trouble, she could feel it. "Mr. Kael, take the seat next to Amara in the third row," Mrs. Garner instructed, snapping Amara out of her thoughts. Her stomach dropped. Of course, just her luck. As Kael moved down the aisle, his long legs carrying him with an almost predatory grace, Amara kept her eyes glued to her notebook. She heard the scrape of the chair next to her and felt the slight shift in the air as he settled beside her. The scent of cedar and something faintly metallic wafted her way, and she clenched her jaw, refusing to acknowledge him. "Hi," he said softly, his voice low enough that only she could hear. She glanced at him out of the corner of her eye. He was leaning back casually, one arm draped over the back of his chair. His head tilted slightly as he looked at her. "I'm Kael," he added, flashing that maddening smile again. "I know," she said curtly, returning her attention to her notebook. "The whole class knows." He chuckled, a deep, rich sound that sent an unbidden shiver down her spine. "And you are?" "Not interested," she shot back, a little sharper than intended. Kael's smile widened. but there was something in his eyes, something dark and unreadable that made her uneasy. "We'll see," he murmured, almost to himself. Amara swallowed hard, her grip tightening on her pen. She didn't know what game he was playing, but she wasn't about to let herself get dragged into it. As the lesson began, she tried to ignore him, but she couldn't shake the feeling that his eyes were on her, watching, waiting. It was the beginning of something she couldn't yet name. Something dangerous. Something that would change everything.